The floor mats shifted every time I stepped off them, as if correcting themselves. At first, I thought it was the air conditioning. The store ran cold at night. The vents above aisle 3 rattled with a tired metallic whine, pushing out a steady breath that smelled faintly of dust and freon. It wasn't impossible that the rubber runners lining the aisles might creep a little under that constant airflow. They were lightweight, black with a grid of circular holes, the kind meant to trap rainwater and dirt from boots. The edges curled if you didn't flatten them with your foot. But air didn't explain the precision. I noticed it around 2:30 in the morning, during the lull between the last trucker coffee refill and the first wave of early commuters. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The refrigerated cases along the back wall exhaled their steady mechanical sigh. Beyond the glass doors, the parking lot sat empty under sodium vapor orange, the highway a distant whisper. I had just finished mopping the tile near the counter and stepped back onto the rubber mat behind the register. It cushioned slightly under my weight, its honeycomb surface firm but flexible. It smelled like damp tires and industrial cleaner. When I stepped off to toss the mop water, I heard it, a soft, dragging sigh. I turned. The mat behind the counter had shifted half an inch to the left, just enough that its corner no longer aligned with the grout line in the tile. I stared at it for a long time, then I nudged it back with my shoe. Cheap rubber, I muttered to the empty store. The problem was that it kept happening. I'd walk down aisle 1, my sneakers making dull, hollow sounds against the perforated surface. Thup, thup, thup. Then step onto bare tile to face the shelves. The tile was cool and smooth through the thin soles. I'd crouch, adjust a row of canned soup, and when I rose and stepped back, the mat had slid forward, closing the small gap I'd left between it and the base of the shelf. Not much, just enough that my heel brushed rubber instead of tile. I began paying attention. The mats ran in neat, parallel strips down each aisle, forming long black pathways over the white floor. They'd been placed months ago after a rainy season turned the store into a slip hazard. I knew their layout the way you know the arrangement of furniture in your own apartment. A slight overlap near aisle 4, a chipped corner near the beer cooler, one mat near the bathroom door that never quite lay flat. By 3:15, those familiar imperfections were gone. The overlap had smoothed into a seamless line. The chipped corner now faced inward, hidden beneath the neighboring mat. The stubborn curl near the bathroom lay perfectly flush against the tile, and the mats seemed closer together. Not bunched, not chaotic, aligned, like they had been measured. I tested it deliberately. Standing in aisle 2, I planted both feet squarely in the center of a runner. The rubber compressed with a faint squeak. I memorized the grout lines framing it on either side. Then I stepped off quickly, 2 paces backward onto bare tile. The mat shifted. It didn't jerk. It didn't snap into place. It exhaled forward, almost imperceptibly, until it once again sat centered beneath where I'd been standing. I felt a prickle crawl up my neck. "Okay," I whispered. I stepped sideways this time, onto the tile between aisle 2 and 3. Behind me, that same dragging murmur, a soft friction against ceramic. The mat had moved laterally, not to its original position but to match where I had stood, like it was tracing me. The store had never felt large before. It was a narrow rectangle of shelving and coolers, every inch familiar. Now the spaces between the aisles seemed to breathe, stretching and narrowing with each glance. I walked faster, down aisle 3 then 4. I cut diagonally across the open area near the drink machines, stepping deliberately off the runners and onto tile. Each time I waited. Each time the mats adjusted. Not randomly, not toward the shelves. Toward me. They filled the negative space I left behind. If I lingered near a shelf, a runner would ease forward to sit beneath my weight. If I stepped away abruptly, another mat would slide into the gap, covering the exposed tile. The bare floor was disappearing. By 4 o'clock, there was no white tile visible between the aisles. Only black. The texture underfoot changed subtly as they overlapped, softer, thicker. My footsteps lost their echo, absorbed by layers of rubber. The usual hollow tap of sneakers on tile vanished. The store grew quieter. Too quiet. Even the refrigerator hum seemed distant now, muffled. I felt contained. I tried the doors. The entrance was framed by a wide mat meant to catch mud from customers' shoes. I stepped onto it slowly. The rubber was thicker here, denser, its surface patterned with raised ridges instead of holes. I stepped off toward the glass. The mat slid forward, pressing against the threshold. I stepped sideways, aiming for the narrow strip of tile near the ice freezer. Another runner glided into place, sealing the gap. The doors themselves didn't move. The world outside, the empty lot, the highway glow, remained visible. But every path to reach them was carpeted in black. My breath fogged faintly against the glass. I turned and ran. I leapt from the mat, aiming for a clear square of tile near the candy display. Midair. I heard it. A rapid, coordinated shudder. When I landed on rubber. The mat had moved before I touched down. I stumbled, caught myself on the shelf. Candy bars rattled in their cardboard trays. No, I said aloud, my voice thin in the padded quiet. I jumped again, sideways this time, erratic, childish, testing. Each time the mats anticipated me, sliding, overlapping, unfolding from beneath shelves with impossible subtlety. They didn't need speed. They needed prediction. They were faster than my decisions. The realization settled slowly, like dust. They weren't reacting to my footsteps. They were reacting to me. The mats had memorized the store, memorized the routes people took, counter to coffee, door to fridge, aisle to register. They had learned the weight and rhythm of bodies crossing them, learned the pauses, the hesitations, and now they were refining it. I stood still, heart hammering. The rubber beneath me felt warm, not heated, just acclimated, as if it had held my weight for longer than I remembered. The aisles no longer felt parallel. The runners angled subtly inward, narrowing the walking space. The counter mat extended farther than it had before, nearly touching the one from aisle 1. Corridor, path, from the back of the store to the register. I took one careful step off the designated line. The nearest mat shifted, pressing gently against my shoe, redirecting my foot, like a guide rail. No, I whispered again. I moved toward the stockroom door behind the counter. The mats flowed ahead of me, smoothing my route. The moment I hesitated, a runner slid sideways, blocking the alternative. They weren't trapping me randomly. They were correcting inefficiency, guiding me along the optimal path. I thought of the countless nights I'd paced behind the counter, the places I lingered, the way I leaned against the cigarette case at 3 a.m., scrolling my phone, the exact square of floor where I stood to watch the sunrise tint the parking lot. The mat beneath that spot was thicker now, layered, reinforced, as if it had been expecting me. The store lights flickered once. The hum of refrigeration deepened into something almost organic, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to travel through the rubber and into my bones. This wasn't about slipping hazards or mud. The mats were a system, a surface that recorded pressure, adjusted for flow, reduced waste, eliminated deviation, optimized movement, contained variables, contained me. I stepped deliberately off the runner one last time, planting my foot on a narrow, exposed triangle of tile near the gum rack. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mat didn't slide toward me. It slid against me, firm, unyielding, pressed my foot back onto its surface. Not aggressively, just decisively, correcting posture, correcting placement, correcting error. I looked down at the black honeycomb pattern stretching in every direction. There was no tile left now. No white grid lines to orient myself. Just a seamless, continuous surface, faintly gleaming under fluorescent light. The air smelled strongly of rubber. The store was silent. I understood, then, with a clarity that felt almost merciful. The mats weren't correcting themselves. They were correcting me. And as I shifted my weight, adjusting my stance to align perfectly with the center of the runner, I felt the floor settle in quiet approval. A man asked if we still honored the pact before placing a stone on the counter. It was 2:17 a.m. The digital clock above the cigarette rack glowed a bruised red, and the store hummed in that lonely, electrical way it always did after midnight. The refrigerators exhaled in long, tired sighs. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, one of them flickering near the coffee station like it couldn't decide whether to stay awake. I had been counting the minutes until 3, when the highway truckers usually stopped drifting through. Instead, the bell above the door gave a brittle jingle that sounded louder than it should have. He didn't hurry. The man stepped in as if he had already been inside and was merely returning to a place he'd left for a moment. He wore a dark overcoat that hung too heavily for late summer, the fabric shiny at the seams with age. His trousers were cuffed narrowly at the ankles, the style old enough to feel deliberate. Dust clung to the hem, the pale chalky kind that collects along unpaved roads. He removed his hat. Not a baseball cap, but a felt one, soft and bowed slightly in the middle, and approached the counter. Up close, I saw that his skin was weathered in a way that didn't match his posture. He stood straight. His eyes were steady, almost gentle. But there was something off about the stillness of him, as if his movements were chosen rather than natural. He placed something on the counter. A man asked if we still honored the pact before placing a stone on the counter. His voice was calm, not joking, not threatening, simply inquiring, the way someone might ask if we accepted expired coupons. I stared at the object between us. It was about the size of a paperweight, oval and flattened. The surface was dark gray but streaked faintly with veins of a dull, metallic sheen. At first I thought it was wet. Then I realized it wasn't reflecting the lights above. It was emitting a kind of low, internal luster. The symbols carved into it were shallow and worn smooth at the edges, looping shapes that didn't resemble any alphabet I knew. They curved in on themselves, intersecting in ways that made my eyes struggle to follow them. I reached out before I could stop myself. The stone was warm, not room temperature, not warmed by his hand, warm like something alive. I pulled my fingers back. "I think you've got the wrong place," I said, my voice sounding thinner than usual. "We don't have any packs." The refrigerator sighed again, louder this time, and one of the fluorescent lights flickered twice in quick succession. He didn't blink. "This establishment," he said gently, "has honored the pact for longer than your shelves have carried plastic packaging." The phrasing unsettled me more than the words themselves. I forced a laugh. "It's just a convenience store." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." Silence pooled between us. The soda fountain hissed softly as pressure equalized in its lines. Somewhere in the back, a bottle shifted with a hollow tap against glass. I glanced at the security monitor mounted in the corner. The feed showed the empty aisles behind him. Except, I frowned. The end cap display of chips was on the wrong side. We'd moved it last week to clear space near the freezer. I remembered hauling it myself. But on the screen, it stood in its old position, bright yellow bags stacked in a pyramid that no longer existed. I looked over his shoulder. The real aisle behind him showed the freezer doors, exactly where I'd left them. But on the monitor, the perspective was subtly skewed. The aisles seemed deeper, longer. "Have you changed hands?" he asked. "Excuse me? Ownership, management, blood." My stomach tightened. "It's been in the same family since the 70s, I said automatically. I didn't know why I was answering him. "Then the pact stands." He slid the stone closer to me. The air seemed to thicken as it moved across the laminate countertop. The buzzing of the lights dipped lower, almost subsonic. The digital clock flickered, the numbers stuttering between 2:17 and 2:16. "What pact?" I whispered. He considered me for a moment, not unkindly. "You keep the boundary," he said. "We keep our side." A draft curled across the back of my neck. The automatic doors were closed. No cars had passed on the highway in several minutes. The world outside the windows looked pressed flat and distant, like scenery in a photograph. I swallowed. Boundary to what? He glanced toward the aisles. I followed his gaze. The shelves were wrong. Not obviously. Not at first. But the canned goods were facing inward, labels turned toward the metal backing instead of outward. The cereal boxes on aisle 3 stood in perfect alignment. Each one rotated precisely 90 degrees. The gum rack by the register was half empty, though I had stocked it an hour ago. I felt a wave of vertigo, as if the floor had subtly shifted beneath the thin rubber mats. My voice caught. I didn't move anything. No, he agreed. You wouldn't have. The stone pulsed faintly beneath the fluorescent light. The carved lines seemed deeper now, more defined. I need to see something, I said suddenly. I stepped away from the counter, leaving him standing there with his hat resting lightly in his hands. The office in the back was barely large enough for a desk and a filing cabinet that had probably been there since the store opened. The air smelled faintly of paper dust and old coffee. I pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside were decades of receipts bundled with yellowing rubber bands, old supplier contracts, and a thick ledger bound in cracked brown leather. I had flipped through it once during training, amused by the looping handwriting and archaic prices. My fingers trembled as I opened it now. Most pages were routine, inventory counts, handwritten notes about plumbing repairs, reminders to rotate milk stock. But near the middle, the ink grew darker, the pen strokes heavier. A heading stretched across 2 pages. September 14th, 1978. Beneath it, in my grandfather's handwriting, renewed terms of the pact. Boundary intact. Payment received. My throat closed. There was a receipt paper-clipped to the page. Not from any supplier I recognized. The paper was brittle, its edges curled inward as if singed. Instead of itemized goods, a single line was typed. 1 stone. Warm. Marked. Accepted. My hands went cold despite the heat creeping through the small room. On the opposite page, a note scrawled in haste. Do not close after midnight. Lights must remain on. Inventory must remain visible. This place keeps the line. The line. The boundary. The refrigerators in the main store fell silent. Not gradually. All at once. The absence of their hum roared in my ears. I stepped back into the aisle. The man was still there. Of course he was. But the store around him felt stretched, as if the walls had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. The shelves were taller now, their tops lost in a dimness that hadn't been there before. The fluorescent lights glowed weakly, halos shrinking around them. Outside the windows there was nothing. No highway, no parking lot, just a flat, depthless dark pressing against the glass. You found it, he said softly. You're not customers, I breathed. He tilted his head. We are precisely customers. The stone on the counter vibrated faintly, not enough to move, but enough to blur the carved symbols if I looked at them too long. What happens if we don't honor it? I asked. The lights dimmed further. For a moment, I saw something between the aisles. A distortion, like heat rising from asphalt. It slid along the cereal boxes, leaving them facing outward again as it passed. The gum rack refilled itself with a faint series of clicks. The boundary thins, he said, and what is kept apart is no longer kept. The front door shuddered in its frame, though nothing touched it. I understood then. The store wasn't here to sell snacks or gasoline. Those were conveniences, camouflage. The constant light, the stocked shelves, the open hours past midnight. They were not business decisions. They were rituals. As long as the aisles were defined, as long as the products were counted and visible and named, there was structure, division, inside and outside, a boundary. And beyond the windows now, I sensed something waiting for the lights to fail. I stepped back to the counter. My hand hovered over the stone. It felt heavier than before when I lifted it. The warmth seeped into my palm, steady and insistent, like a pulse syncing with my own heartbeat. We accept, I heard myself say. The man's expression softened, not in relief, but in acknowledgement. He replaced his hat. Until the next renewal, he said. The refrigerators roared back to life. The fluorescent lights steadied, bright and harsh. Outside, the parking lot reappeared, empty but real. A moth battered itself against the glass near the ice machine. I looked down at the counter. The stone was gone. In its place sat a narrow slip of paper, newly printed from the register. I hadn't touched the keys. The receipt read, "Item, boundary maintained. Total paid." The doorbell jingled as he stepped out into the night. When I checked the ledger later, the page from 1978 had shifted. A new entry had been added beneath my grandfather's. The ink was still drying. March 4th, 2026. Pact honored. Boundary intact. Signed in my handwriting. I locked the doors at dawn, but I did not turn off the lights. I don't think we ever will, because this place isn't a store. It's a line drawn in fluorescent light and stocked shelves. And as long as we keep selling, counting, naming, whatever waits beyond the glass remains a customer, not a neighbor.